Thank you so much, Savannah. Thank you for having us. Thank you for helping us organize this. Super excited. Hi to everyone in the chat. I'd love to see where y'all are tuning in from. So if you want to throw in the name of the city you're in or the country you're in, if you're outside of the States, that'd be super. I'm based in New York and Jonathan's in San Francisco. But just a quick introduction. My name is Carol. I'm originally from Greece. I've been in the States for close to 20 years now. And for the past 12 years, I've been in sales and startups. I started out as co-founder of a beverage company back in 2010 and joined my first startup in 2013 as founding AE. I've had 2 exits helping companies scale. And in 2019, I joined Ramped as a startup consultant. To date, I've probably worked with over 100 early stage startups in the B2B space, teaching founders how to sell and coaching sales teams. And super excited to be here. Jonathon is a past client of mine. So really excited to have him talk about his journey, the company. They have a great product. And as Savannah said, would love to see your questions in the chat so we can cater the talk to you. This is not scripted. We're just going to have a back and forth talking about selling as a founder, being a founder sales manager, and I'm going to pass it over to Jonathon right now to give his introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Carol. Welcome, everyone. So my name is Jonathon. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a startup called the AirGarage. We basically, you can think of us as like a property manager for parking lots and parking garages. So if you've ever parked in a parking lot or a parking garage anywhere in the world, you may not have realized it. You probably have either interacted with us or you've interacted with one of our competitors. So normally the experience is like you drive up and there's like a gate arm and you push it and you get a ticket and all that sort of stuff. AirGarage is basically just trying to change that experience, make it all based on your license plate, using license plate reading cameras, using technology, and ultimately making it a better experience for the consumer and for the owner. And so, where sales comes into that is that we basically came at this originally from a consumer perspective of, hey, we really want to make this a better experience for drivers because everybody knows that parking sucks. But we eventually realized like, hey, the people that actually make the decision in this industry are the owners of the real estate. So we need to go sell to them. And so I had to figure out how to, do sales, started out by just going door to door and like winging it and doing the very, bang your head against the wall sort of approach. And obviously we've evolved a lot since then, but ultimately we sell to real estate owners that own parking lots and parking garages. And that enables us to then try to make a better consumer experience on the other end as well. And so we raised our Series A last year from Andreessen Horowitz. Our seed round was in 2019 from Floodgate and Founders Fund. And we're just, constantly working to make our sales engine more effective and more efficient. So that's why, I'm here to learn as well.
And I think this is why you're a great person to talk to this, because you've gone through this journey of, sort of figuring out what the sales motion is, doing it yourself, hiring talent. We'll talk about working together, having me as a sales coach, and then, being able to raise a Series A. And the reality is that most companies don't make it to that point. I think we hear a lot about the successes. Oh, we raised a Series A, a Series B, and we're scaling and making all this revenue. But the reality is that most startups fail, especially at this very early stage for lack of product market fit or running out of cash. So I think it's awesome to have you here. I know you don't do these often, to get to hear about your journey and learn from you as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to start sharing my screen. We have a small deck we've prepared for y'all. Oh no, Savannah, I can't pull it up. Starting out with technical difficulties. Let's see, let's try this again. Guys, bear with me for 1 second. I apologize. Okay, let's try it again. Can everybody see my screen? Yes? Okay, awesome. So we've already done the introductions. Now let's look at the agenda. What are the topics we're going to be covering today? So for our agenda, we're going to start with the 5 things to master and the 5 things to avoid when you're selling as an early stage founder. And again, these are learnings for working with over 100 early stage startups. Then we're going to talk with Jonathon about when that transition happens and what that looks like when you start selling as a founder and then you hire sales talent and you become that founder sales manager when you don't have someone internally to manage the team. We're going to talk about how to coach that first sales team and what's the right way to scale responsibly. And then we're going to end with everything you need for Series A. So we're going to start with the 5 things to master as an early stage founder and the 5 things to avoid. Before I go into the slide, as I have you guys in the chat, does anyone have a guess or does anyone want to speak from their experience as to what the 5 most important things to master or the 5 things to really avoid doing where you're starting to sell and when you're starting to reach out to customers as a founder that's selling? I'm going to give you a minute to look, and I'm going to look in the chat. So I see Anthony says master product market fit for sure. Should be your number 1 priority. Otherwise, your company doesn't exist. Do we have anyone else listening? Yep. You need to listen to your early customers because they will give you the most important information you need. Everything else is an assumption early on. It's the market that will tell you what to do. Develop a repeatable sales system, says Henry. Spot on. Rose says master hiring and creating a sales playbook. You guys are spot on. This is exactly it. Mark says brand. I think you've mentioned everything I have on this list. So let's take a look. So again, this is from working with a lot of early stage founders and having been a founder myself. I'm going to start with the things to master. And Jonathon, would love to hear your thoughts as well, having been at that early pre-product market fit stage when you started selling. So the number 1 thing for me is always you need to master your elevator pitch. I cannot tell you guys how many messages I get on LinkedIn every single week when someone's trying to pitch me. And I ask them, what is it that you do? And the elevator pitch is just terribly crafted where it makes no sense, or there's a lot of technical jargon, or it's just a ramble. It's not concise. It's not clear. And the thing is that if you have a clear, concise elevator pitch that anyone can understand, no matter their industry knowledge or expertise, you're good to go because that's going to open conversations for you. If your elevator pitch is too complicated, too long, people will start to tune out. And this is, again, a very fast way to disengage your audience if they don't understand what you do. So a formula I've seen that really works is when you say something along the lines of, we provide X service for Y audience by way of Z. That's something that works really well. That's number 1. Number 2, you need to be doing outreach. And that doesn't mean just trying to sell to your friends and family, your network of other founders. You need to figure out who your ICP is, your ideal client profile, and create simple messaging to reach out to these people and see, are my assumptions correct? Do these people actually have a need for what I'm building? Are they looking? Would they be willing to pay for it? How do they compare with what they have going on right now? After that, after you start that basic outreach, you need to create a process for yourself, a basic sales playbook where these are the actions I can take every time to get someone from a lead to a paid customer. Of course, you need to be following up. I see this with a lot of founders where they'll hop on a call with someone, they'll believe the call went well, and then I'll say, okay, what happened? When are you talking to the prospect again? And the founder's like, well, I'm not sure, they said they'd reach back out, right? No, it's our job as sellers to always follow up, set an agenda, have clear next steps. Most people have an aversion to it or don't think of doing it. They feel it's pushy or odd. And lastly, someone in the chat said it too, brand. You need to be building your brand. As a CEO of a company, your job is to build a vision and get people bought into that vision. You need to become what I like to call a chief storytelling officer. You need to tell the story of your company, as that will help you attract investors, attract talent, get in front of press. You need to be doing all these things when you start, right? These are super important. And Jonathon, from your experience going through this journey, are these things you agree with? Are these things you've done when you started? Is there something that you feel we should add in this list?
Yeah, I mean, I basically wish you had given me this list when I was actually getting started, because this is a pretty damn good list in the sense that, yeah, I mean, if you do these things and you avoid the things that are on the avoid list, even from a basic level, it's very interesting to me, having been through the founder journey and then also watching other founders that are coming to me for advice or like wanting us to invest in their company or whatever it happens to be, how often people are just, I think like as founders, it's very easy to like be deluded about like what matters and what doesn't matter. And we talk about this all the time in the startup scene. And like you see it all the time where it's like somebody will be focused on like, giant partnerships that they think are going to get them revenue, but like, they're not going to materialize for multiple years, or they'll be focused on like the product and creating the perfect consumer experience and like all of these sorts of things. And at the end of the day, the one thing that you can do to guarantee that you get closer to your end goal of building a large successful company is like go out and sell to customers, sell to users, and talk to them, especially in the early days. And so I would agree with all of these. I mean, like just basic tips that come to mind when I'm looking through this list with for example, the elevator pitch is like, the biggest mistake that I often hear is just this vague, generic, like, we're going to make, the world like, once you get to like a very late stage, right? Like you're gonna IPO, then your pitch should be very generic, right? It's like the WeWork pitch at the like IPO stage, not that they're a good model to follow, is like, it was like we're gonna elevate the world's consciousness. But if you come in as a seed stage founder or like pre-seed stage founder and you say that, like it just means nothing. It doesn't tell anybody actually what you're going to do. Like Carol said, it needs to be like, this is the specific, obvious, what do we do and how does it help our users, right? So it's like for us, it's, we manage and monetize owners' parking lots for them and help them make more money and have less headaches, right? It's like very basic, sounds really dumb, not sexy in any way, but like that's what you need in those early days. And then you mentioned the don't outreach to friends and family sort of thing. Or like make sure you reach out beyond them. I always had a rule for myself in the early days that like I wouldn't even talk about the concept or ideas or anything like that with friends and family, because they will give you this like false sense of confidence where they like, they're friends and family of yours. They're not going to say like your baby's ugly and you have a terrible idea. They're just going to like, tell you that it's a good idea. And so, really want to talk to just customers. And ideally those customers should be strangers that you've never met before that are going to give you very honest feedback by either listening to you or not listening to you. And then you want to go talk to those customers and you want to start by listening to their problems and hearing about their day and understanding their life before you ever even start to pitch them. And then, as you mentioned, you can start to run a process and like build a sales playbook. But the important thing with following up to keep in mind is just that like you're never going to be top of mind for these people, right? They have a million things going on. It's very easy to forget that your customers have their own life and they're the main character of their own life with their own story and this like whole like narrative revolving around them, and you're just like one tiny little subplot, maybe a footnote in their life. And so like if you don't follow up, then like the footnote, of course, just gets skipped over. Most people don't read the footnotes in books, right? And so that's why follow-up is so important. It's just because you think you're the main character, but like they think they're the main character. And so you need to make sure that you're following up with them to be like, hey, like we could be, co-characters sort of thing. And then, with the brand awareness, like in the early days, like the thing that's the wrong thing to do for brand awareness is like, like you shouldn't be focused on like, hey, we need to create like business cards and marketing materials and all this sort of stuff that's like perfect and beautiful. You should be just focused on, like you said, Carol, what is your story and like, why does this matter? Because that is what gets early customers to believe in you and buy your product. Like I still think about like the relationships that I have today, multiple years in with the very earliest customers, the first 15 or so locations that we signed on. When I see them, it's like very much this personal relationship now where it's like, they'll like be like, oh my gosh, like I haven't seen you in so long. Like, how are things going? Like, I remember when you guys were so small, just like, it's like as if you saw like your aunt and she was like, I remember when you were this tall. And it's like, that's why those people buy in the early days a lot of times is because they're like buying into something that they know will be bigger in the long run. And so that's why your story, and that story being your brand, is like so important. It's not about the like, brand, I don't know, assets and things like that. It's about that story and like the why behind what you're building. So I definitely think that this list, makes a lot of sense. And, if I had had this in 2017, I would have wasted less time doing the things on the right-hand side of this list.
I love everything you said, and I love the analogies because I think it makes it easy to remember, like the footnotes, right? I haven't thought about it this way before, but the thing is that your customers forget. They get a lot of sales calls, they get a lot of people, a lot of vendors trying to get in front of them. And unless you provide them with value really quickly and clearly explain what you do, which goes back to the elevator pitch, you've lost them, right? We all have very short attention spans. And then I love what you said about the ant and little kid analogy, because it's true. You're selling those relationships. You're selling that vision, and early on, the early adopters buy into that vision of, hey, there's something special here, and I want to be a part of it. Because at the beginning, the technology isn't where it's supposed to be.
It's so bad. Yeah, it's so
It's
buggy.
so
Like
bad. It's
your aunt
clunky.
only puts up with you being an annoying 8-year-old because she's your aunt and she like loves you, and it's like the same thing with your customers. They're only going to put up with your buggy product because like they're an early adopter and they love you and they like see the broader vision, right?
Yeah, 100%. And not to spend too much time on this list, but looking at the other column of what to avoid, obviously we talked about selling. So don't avoid actively selling. I get if you're a technical founder, sales doesn't come naturally to you. You don't have that sales intuition. You need to do it. Whether you need to read sales books, hire a coach, take a sales seminar, to start talking to your customers, you cannot avoid it, right? And there's this phrase, if we build it, people will come. No one's going to come. No one knows about your product. You need to go out there and actively push it. So, not being process oriented, again, I understand if you don't have a sales background, but try to create a very simple playbook for yourself. Use a Google Doc, use a pen and paper, write down what are the different actions you take when you talk to people, try to replicate that, see what's working, what's not working. Always follow up because you are a footnote. Do not hire sales talent too soon. And we'll talk more about that when we're talking about scaling responsibly. And lastly, please charge your customers. Freemium does not work. You need to know what people are willing to pay for your product. You need to test it out. You need to figure out what pricing model works for you. People will not be engaged if they get something for free. And at the beginning, you want data. So your customers need to have skin in the game, and you need to charge them in order for that to happen. Jonathon, do you have any thoughts on that, or should we move on?
Yeah, I'll just focus on the last one here, the not charging your early customers, just because I think it's a trap that people fall into where they think like, oh, I should go raise money from VCs so that then I can build a product and give it to, customers after all of that and give it to them for free. It's right. So they think it's like fundraise, then build a product, then go get customers. It's like ideally you should flip that around where it's like get customers, build the product for those customers after you've signed a contract with them or after they've agreed to pay you money, and then use that traction to go raise money from VCs, especially if you don't have name brand or credibility in Silicon Valley. Like I absolutely did not when I started fundraising. Like nobody knew who I was. Nobody still knows who I am. Like I am a cockroach. I am a footnote. But like traction makes up for all of those things, right? And the trap that people fall in is they raise the money and then they build the product and they don't charge for it because they think like, why do we need to charge for it? It's just $10 a month or $50 a month or $100 a month. That's not that meaningful when we have a couple $1 million from VCs in our bank account. And then what you don't wind up getting is the brutal feedback that like people would not pay for this, right? There's actually a product recently that we like were using as a beta user, very early startup, and they basically gave it to us for free, and we were using it very happily. And then eventually the time came where they were like, "Hey, how much would you pay for this?" And I was like, "Well, I'm pretty happy that it's free, but I don't know if we would actually justify paying for it if there was actually a price to it." And we wound up sort of like rolling off of their product. And so they would have gotten that feedback a lot sooner that, hey, there's not enough value here compared to the existing tools that we have already for us to actually justify paying in addition to what we have through like a Notion or something like that. And like they could have saved themselves a couple of months of like iterating on that existing product if they had gotten that feedback and like made their product more valuable sooner, right? So it's like a lot of things in sales, and I think especially in the early days of the company is like people avoid doing them, or founders avoid doing them because they're afraid and they're painful. And it's like, you need to learn to like lean into that pain. And as the instructors at the Barry's bootcamp that I used to go to always used to say, is like, get comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's the name of the game. It's like, you have to be willing to look someone in the eye and have them tell you like, well, your baby is ugly, and be okay with that and be like, okay, well, I will go make it better. So I think that feedback loop of like charging customers, especially if you're not a repeat founder who's sold a business and been successful, like you need that quick feedback loop as much as possible.
You're giving us great food for thought, and thank you. So, going to the next slide, let's talk about transitioning from founder led, meaning the founders are the salespeople, to becoming a founder sales manager. So, I would love for you to talk to us about how you started selling, right? What was the process? Was it you, or was it you and your co founders? What was the exercise you went through to identify? And you touched upon this at the beginning, but how did you start identifying, who your customers were, to then have that pivot that, oh shit, maybe we're selling to the wrong people. There's a broader audience here. Like, walk me through that early sales motion before we talk about, bringing on sales talent.
Yeah, great question. I'll try to like give you the summarized version of, because there was a few, if you don't know the history of AirGarage, which none of you do, there was a few different business models that we sort of went through in the very early days. So we originally started the company, basically AirGarage was, while we were students at Arizona State University, we basically built AirGarage as this peer-to-peer marketplace for renting out driveways, right? So like homeowners in the neighborhood near the university could rent a spot in their driveway to somebody at the university on a monthly basis. It was basically Airbnb, but for your driveway, right? And then eventually, like about a year later, we sort of shifted our focus to like these churches and businesses near the campus, and they were already selling parking. They were just doing it in a very manual, offline way, where they would hire somebody to sit there for 12 hours a day and like collect cash, and it was very, very manual. And then eventually over time, we transitioned from selling to those people to like the professional real estate owners that own like downtown urban parking lots, parking garages that you think of these days. And so it's like, I think back to the very first sales that we were doing, it was like to those owners of the homes near the university. And I mean, to be clear with everybody, like I did not come from a sales background. When I was going to school, I was studying physics, which is like about the farthest that you can get from being a salesperson. And like, I was like just, doing a ton of math and like science and like going into the lab and like all very like lonely things that you're doing, not involving any other people. Like all of the people I was with every day are like, for lack of a better term, like extreme nerds. And so is I, right? And so it's like, I was not a salesperson in any way, shape or form. And so the important thing though, is that I like went out there and did this, right? And like went out and was like, okay, it's the summer, like school comes back in August. We need to be ready to launch, and we need to have driveways listed. And I would literally go into these neighborhoods and go door to door. Like I would go and knock on your door and say like, hey, my name's Jonathan. I'm a student at the university. University parking's really expensive. Do you want to rent out your space in your driveway to a student looking for parking? Right. And we would have that conversation face to face, me and you at your front door, which is possibly the most intimidating possible way to sell. Right. And so it's like, whenever I'm talking to like our sales team now, I'm like, nothing's as bad as like doing that. So like, you can do this, like you've got this. But ultimately what I did was just set like restrictions on myself, because I wanted nothing less than to go out and do these sales. Like I was like dreading it every single day. I would like avoid it at all costs. I would do everything before I could go out and do these sales. And then I would go out, and it was, summertime in Phoenix. So I'd go out at like 4 p.m. to try to avoid the 115-degree heat. But I would go out into these neighborhoods, and I would tell myself I needed to knock on one door, just one door. I need to knock on one door, and then I can go home and I can like, watch, some dumb show on Netflix and like tune out for the rest of the day. And so I would go knock on the one door, and then I would go home. And then eventually, like after I'd forced myself to do that enough times, I would realize like, hey, nobody actually answers when I knock on one door. So like, how about I force myself to like knock until I get at least one conversation, and then like I'll go and like, go home. And so it's like just increasing those basically requirements on myself, and like forcing myself to do the thing and forcing myself to go to talk to customers. That was the first step. And like through that is how I learned to like actually have a conversation with these people and understand them. And then, I mean, there's lots of things sort of to talk about in the rest of the history, but I'll sort of skip forward to like the churches, the businesses, selling to those people. It was a great practice for me as an early salesperson, because it would be me in a room with like the church board selling to them about, hey, you should stop, using this man that's just been sitting here for 10 or 15 years that you know very well, and you should use AirGarage to automate your parking operations, right? Because they were spending 90% of their time as a church focused on this parking lot and 10% of their time running the church. And I was like, this is just obviously backwards. Like, let us run the parking lot so you can run the church. That's why you're here on this board of trustees, is you didn't come here to run a parking lot. And so it was great training because there was like 15 people on this board and me at the end of the table, and just questions from every single direction. And it really gives you a good practice in being on your toes. And to be honest, like, we hadn't built the product yet at that point, right? It didn't exist. Like, my co-founder Scott at the time was just like basically sitting at home, like building this live. And so it's like they would ask me a question like, hey, how are you going to manage, events where we have, not enough parking spaces available, like churches on Sundays, we need our spaces available for us. And then I would kind of just like make up the explanation. And if they were all like, yeah, that seems pretty reasonable, then we would go home and like build that night, right? And like, thankfully, they never asked us to actually see the product, because we basically like signed a contract with them on like May 15th of 2018. And then we went live June 1st of 2018. And in that 2 weeks, we had to like finish building the product. So that's one of my biggest lessons for founders whenever I talk to them, is like, you can sell people before the product exists, right? And that is the best possible way to know that what you're building actually matters and is actually useful to the customer. And the only times in our history that we've gotten burnt was when we built something that we didn't actually know there was a customer for, or we hadn't already signed a contract with, right? And I say all of that given the context that like, we're first-time founders. We didn't know how to sell. We didn't know what to build. We didn't know what product to, go build. And so it's like, the best way to just not have to make those decisions as like an experienced founder is to just let the customer tell you. And if the customer signs up and is paying you money and signs a contract, like, that's a damn good indication that you're onto something and you should go build it.
So I have two questions for you, and then I want to move on to the next slide because I know we have a lot to cover. So question number one is, how did you know that this was working? Was it because of what you just mentioned, that people were willing to buy before you even had a product? Let's start with that question.
Yeah, I think I think one of the biggest things that is very difficult as an early stage first time founder is knowing when something is working and when something is not, right? Because like, if you ask people like what product market fit is, you'll get the vague answers like what Mark Andreessen says or whatever. It's like basically just like, what when you see it, or they'll say like, your product is flying off the shelves. And like, no matter what you do in the early days, like, you're not going to know it when you see it because you've never seen it before. And your product's probably not going to be flying off the shelves because you need to like iterate and, stuff like that. For us, it was never like an aha, like, obviously this is the right way yet moment, but it was like good indications where like we'd been working on the driveways for like a year. And we were I remember sitting in this sandwich shop with my two co-founders, and, we were discussing like, do we stick with this known business that's like doing decently okay? Do we go take this risk with this church and build what they need? And then the first week that we took over that parking lot, and I was like sitting there in the sun, like managing it and everything, and we saw the numbers, it was just like, oh, this is like obviously better. I think we probably made more money in that 1 week from that church than we did like the entire year with the driveways. And so it was like the revenue really was what led us in the right direction. And then I would describe that basically the same thing has happened for us with the second transition that we made, which was more of the same business model and product and stuff like that, just tweaking the ideal customer profile that we were going after, from churches and businesses to like downtown real estate owners. And that, you can just look back at our revenue charts and it's like 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, like just like, through the roof, right? And so it's like looking back at it, it's like, oh, it's very obvious that like this change in ICP was the right move to make. But in the moment, it's not always that obvious, except that the customer is more willing to talk to you. And that's the thing. It's like, I would describe the church and business concept where it's like, hey, we help these churches and businesses open up their parking lots for the first time and create public parking, and it's completely free money to them. And I would describe it to somebody like you or one of my friends or my family or whatever, and be like, that's genius. It seems like a no-brainer. They must be signing up left and right. And I would always go home and be like, but they're not. They're not signing up left and right. They don't get it. They don't want it. Why don't they want it? And then eventually when we shifted to the ICP that we go after now, it was like, wow, they get it. They want it. They understand.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you so much. So going to the next slide, coaching your first sales team and scaling, before you even hired sales talent, what was your thinking behind it? Because I've heard from a lot of founders that, once I hit 100,000 in ARR, annual recurring revenue, or, once I close my first 10 deals, then I'm going to hire sales reps. And usually people pull those numbers out of their butt. There's no logic or reasoning behind it. It's just like an imaginary number that it sounds big enough that when I hit it, I'm ready to hire sales talent. So, before we talk about working together and coaching the team, when did you know that, okay, now I actually need to hire reps versus me being the person doing the selling?
Yeah, so for us, it was a little bit of a unique experience just because. So I was the only salesperson up through the time that we raised our seed round, right? We were maybe doing somewhere in the range of $100,000 of ARR when we raised our seed round. Not a ton of revenue, but enough to like prove that like, hey, we're not just some joker. We're not like, this isn't a completely made up idea. Like there's customers, there's traction, there's revenue. And that's the best way as a first time founder to get investors to take you seriously, right? Is to like show them there's some traction and then they'll listen to the rest of the like, why are we building this and what does this do and why does it make sense? So I was the only salesperson through the seed round. And even for like 6 or so months after the seed round, I was the only salesperson alongside our like first employee who was sort of doing ops generalist type
Brian?
role, right? Brian. And so it was just the two of us. There wasn't any sales team. But then when we started to hire people was because we basically, at the time, our churches and businesses sales model was still very much like go to the physical locations and like do sales to them. Because if you can't tell, there's a theme here where I don't come from a sales background. I don't know how to build a sales team, but I never let that sort of thing stop me. And so I'm just like, let's just brute force it. And so at the time, our sales motion was just like, we don't know how to cold call people. We don't know how to like find their info online. So we'll just show up in person and like close the deal or like try to close the deal, right? And so what we did was we hired somebody in Los Angeles, somebody in Detroit, and somebody in New York as like our first 3 markets. And we really didn't choose those markets. We more so said we want really smart generalist people that maybe have some sales ability, but like haven't been salespeople at bigger companies where they know that like there's this process and training and all this sort of stuff, because those people won't necessarily thrive in this totally undocumented, process, right? And so we hired these generalists, and that was sort of the like first step there. But it was mostly, why did we hire them at the time that we did? It was because we wanted to grow, and I physically couldn't go knock on doors in New York, Detroit, and Los Angeles all at the same time. But
So you needed more bandwidth, right?
Sorry?
So you needed more bandwidth. You needed more arms and legs to help you in this process. And that's
basically, yeah. And it was all focused on like top of funnel. Like, how do we get more people to like know what AirGarage is? And the best way for us to do that was to just go knock on doors and like, hit people up. And so it was, all about bandwidth for the top of the funnel.
Awesome. Thank you. So I want to take a slight left turn with something you mentioned, how you just hired, people that were smart generalists versus someone that had been there, done that, crushed it in a bigger company. I see this a lot with companies where they're looking to hire and they'd be like, oh, this person crushed their quota in this really big company. They'll be perfect for our startup. I always lean to the side of hire someone green, someone you can mold, someone that during the interview process shows coachability and grit, willingness to do the work, versus someone who has been there, done that, because it doesn't necessarily mean that if someone has done great at another company, they're going to do great at your company. At a startup, you need someone with the characteristics of someone that's willing to roll with the punches, is excited about what you're building, versus someone that has the, sales experience. So just wanted to throw that in there. Now, to give people context, I've worked with AirGarage for close to 2 years, like 20 months, helping coach Jonathon and coach the sales team, mostly work on the sales team, on scripts, processes, coaching on calls. So we were introduced from another founder that had worked with Ramp. I had been the team coach, and they said to Jonathon, hey, this is the coach we've been working with. Now, a lot of people that hire coaches for their team don't necessarily know what to look for in a coach. So how did you decide that, we want to work with Carol, we want to work with Ramp? What was the decision-making process? And then once we started working together, how did you know that I was the right coach for your team? And you can compliment me if you want when you get to that point.
Yeah, I think that, we did talk to like three or four different like coaching, options at the time. And ultimately, I think that everybody had a very similar pitch of like, here's what I can do for your business. And like, here's the information that we'll be able to teach your sales team. Because like, if you think about it, it's like teaching the sales team a process and some basic scripting is like relatively table stakes. But I think that what made us choose you all was really the personality and like the way you were approaching the conversation, right? And so, for us, it was about like, who do we see as the people that we're excited about having on our team that we think can like help us out here? Because it's almost like at that stage, like, and for how long we worked together, it's like you were basically a part of our team for that entire thing, right? So it's like, it's just like any other job interview. Do I think that you're like going to be a good partner for us? Do I think that you're going to be able to work with us? And I think that that's true of like anything, right? If you're looking at investors, if you're looking at employees, if you're looking at really any person that's going to interact with your company, you want to be evaluating like, okay, there's sort of table stakes stuff, but like after that, is this somebody that I'm going to be excited about to be on a call with every day? And I think that after we started working together, the biggest, clue in that led me to know that like you were the right choice was just like, for lack of a better way of putting it, you were kind of a savage in a positive way where you didn't hold back your feedback for me or for the sales team. And that's what we needed, right? Was I, especially as a junior, like have never run a sales team before. I think I was too nice to the sales team in the sense that like, I didn't want to give them critical or like constructive feedback because I thought that they couldn't take it or I thought I would hurt their feelings. But like, it turns out people really love getting feedback, and people, especially if it's done in a positive, constructive manner, right? You shouldn't just be like, wow, that really sucked, Carol. You should just, give them the feedback, but like in a constructive way with a framework of like, this is how we can improve for the future. And I think that's one of the things that our team has given me consistent feedback on in the last 18 or 24 months is just that they really appreciate that working here, they can like do their role, but constantly be getting better in their role and constantly learning and asking new questions that build on what they learned the week before. And you can't do that without consistent, constructive, transparent feedback. And so I think that that's the biggest thing that clued me in pretty quickly that like you were the right choices. You weren't holding back on feedback for me or for the team or for our product and like our customer profile and stuff like that, where I'm sure that there was times when you were like, what the F are these people doing? Like, why are they saying this, but they actually, do this? Like, we need to straighten these things out. And that's ultimately, that's what you really need in the early days is somebody that has seen it before, has worked with similar companies and can tell you like left from right and like up from down, right? And we just didn't have that orientation yet. And that was what was so valuable.
I definitely don't hold back. And my boyfriend will tell you the same thing. Now, I know it's 2:42 and I'd love to do another, 8 minutes of us chatting and then leave 10 minutes for Q&A. So my question for you is, what were the things that you felt were important that the team nails, whether that's scripts or their demo or the way they describe the company and the value add or the questions they ask their customers to know, okay, now this is a systematic approach that's working that we can use as a playbook to say, you know what, we're running this the right way, it's working, it's repeatable, it's scalable, and I can use it because, the traction makes sense before we talk about our last point, which is raising Series A, because you'll investors will ask you about those numbers and you need to show that there's consistent growth, right? So what were the things that were important to you as a founder sales manager at this stage to know that the team needs to nail these things and we've got it, we're there, that we can go ask investors for money?
Yeah, and sorry if I feel distracted. I just felt an earthquake while you were talking, and I was like, is this actually an earthquake?" It was a small earthquake. I'm in San Francisco, for those of you that don't know, and there's just random earthquakes, but it was actually a decent little shake. Anyway, so what's important and like heading into the Series A, basically, like what did we need to prove to ourselves to the investors? I mean, you basically want to work backwards, right, from the like requirements of an investor, right? Like if an investor is thinking about a business, going from the seed to the Series A, like Carol said at the beginning, not a lot of companies make that transition, right? For every 10 companies that raise a Series A, 10 companies that raise a seed round, only 3 will actually go on to raise their Series A. So it's a big milestone to get to the Series A. And ultimately, what they're looking for is that you have some semblance of product market fit by the time that you get to your Series A. If you spend your whole seed round money and you don't get any traction, then they're going to be like, there's probably not a there for this business, and like it should be shut down, and like we'll take our bets on the other ones, right? But by the time that you get to the Series A, when you raise it, they're effectively looking at this business and saying, we fully believe that this business can be a multi-billion-dollar company and achieve hundreds of millions of dollars of annual revenue. And like the reason we think that is because of their traction and their product market fit. Sorry if I skipped your question, but like working backwards from all of that, if you want to show that you have product market fit, usually the sort of benchmark that they're looking for is about $1 million in annualized revenue, growing at a certain rate year over year, which is somewhere in the 3 to 5x range. So then you need to think about like, what does our sales team need to achieve for that? And for me, the biggest indicator that our sales team was on the right direction for that was mostly around the top of the funnel, right? Because like that has always been our biggest constraint. If you think about any sales process, there's going to be one part of your process that is the bottleneck. And if you're optimizing anything except for that bottleneck, then you're not spending your time on the right thing. But I think once we figured out how do we do cold calling, how do we do the scripts for cold calling, how do we get in touch with the right people consistently, and once we get those people on the phone, which is challenging enough, how do we actually get them interested in moving into our pipeline? Once we sort of started figuring out that all of that out, it's like, okay, everything else is downstream from this. We can show to the investors that like we have a script, we know how to target people and all that sort of stuff. And then from there, you know, we can pretty much figure the rest of this out. Like once we have people in our funnel, they generally are more likely to close than they're not. And so like top of funnel, figuring that out was the biggest thing for us going toward the Series A that we wanted to figure out for the sales team.
Yeah, makes sense. So tell me again, how much did you guys raise?
Yeah, so our Series A was $12.5 million.
Great. And where were you? I believe you had, if you're allowed to share this, where were you in revenue at that time?
Yeah, we were doing just over like a little over $1.5 million of annualized revenue. And when I say annualized revenue, I mean for this business, it's not a recurring subscription type of thing. So I mean, like if you take the last month of revenue, multiply by 12, that's what I mean by annualized revenue. And the important thing that the investors were looking at and that we were looking at is from January of 2021 to July of 2021, when we started our fundraise, we'd basically grown like 5 or 6x in that 6-month period, right? Which is like really excellent growth. You know, you can basically raise, you know, money with any business with that kind of growth if you can pull it off. So that's the name of the game, right? It's like you've proven like, hey, you've gotten to a pretty significant amount of revenue, which you could not achieve if you didn't have some semblance of product market fit, and you did it quickly, right?
So would you say that the biggest thing when looking to raise that amount of money is really traction, which of course shows signs of product market fit? Because you're never really at product market fit, right? And it'll always change.
It's a spectrum.
Yes. So are those the two biggest things?
Yeah, and that's why I always use the word, you have some semblance of product market fit, because even today, I don't claim that we have perfect product market fit. Like, do customers sign up with us? Yes. Could they sign up more easily and faster? Probably. So it's like, we're always striving for that. But yeah, I mean, the biggest things they're looking for is that like traction and like how quickly did you get there, right? And like how much money did you have to spend to get there, right? If you raise a monster seed round of $10 million and then you spend it over the course of 4 years and you only get to $1 million in revenue after those 4 years, they're probably not going to look at that super favorably. But it's like if you raised like $2 million and it took you a year or two to get to your, $1 million in revenue, that's a very reasonable amount of time. And like then after you've hit those benchmarks, then they're looking at the team and the idea and the concept and like the market you're going after and stuff like that. But like those are the first like get your foot in the door things.
Makes sense. Is there anything you feel that we have not covered that you'd like to talk about, whether that's working with a coach or working with the sales team or hiring more people or raising Series A, anything relevant to what we talked about that you feel is super important that I did not ask you?
No, I think the biggest thing to keep in mind is just that like before your Series A, you should really keep your team very lean. And your goal is how do we get as many customers as possible, as much revenue as possible before we run out of money and then go raise a Series A. And like, I think a mistake that a lot of people make is like hiring salespeople too soon when it should be the founder going and doing the sales. I think the mistake is that like they hire a lot of people before going to Series A. Like we have, I don't know. I think it's easy to look ahead at the companies a stage ahead of you and be like excited about that growth. Like right now we're at like 35 people, which to me feels like a mega corp because it was like 3 people a couple of years ago. But like before the Series A, we never had more than like 15 people on the team, and a good number of those people were salespeople. So it was like, how do we just figure out this sales machine? Because that's ultimately what's going to feed and be the lifeblood of the rest of this business. So don't overhire, and make sure you're staying really in touch with your sales process to get that off the ground. Because if not, then you're probably just playing house.
So just to make it very simple for everyone, what you're saying is before Series A, your main focus where you're spending your money as a company is on sales talent, sales resources, whether that's a coach or a seminar or the tech stack that the team needs. Just focus on getting traction and do it as quickly as possible to have those numbers to then go and say, hey, this is how much money we've been able to get from our customers. This is the amount of time that it took us to get there. And this is why we believe we have product market fit and you should invest in us, investor X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. And just to be clear, you can't outsource those things to like a hired gun sales leader or AE. Like you need to be the one running the sales and running the sales team yourself if you're going to get that feedback and iterate toward product market fit.
Yep. And here you're preaching to the choir. So I think we're good. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to check the chat and see if we have any questions. If you have not submitted your question, we have 10 minutes and we would love to hear from you. So let's see. Luke says, did you use marketing tools to target the market in the early days, or was it primarily door to door?
Yeah, we never had a lot of success. I mean, with marketing, like we now are finally building out a marketing team, but sort of pretty early on, like we ran experiments when we were doing like the driveways with like Facebook ads. Those didn't really work that well because of like how extremely local we need to be targeting, and like Facebook just wasn't a good method for that. And then we actually did like door hangers, door to door. So I've put up like tens of thousands of door hangers personally on people's doors. It's a lot of fun, great exercise. And then actually, funny enough, we hired a company to do door hangers in like University of Michigan, USC, and like a few other places as we were trying to grow our driveway business. And they actually scammed us and didn't put up the door hangers. And the reason we knew this is because like there was zero conversions from these door hangers. And we knew from our putting up the door hangers that there was usually about a 2.5% conversion rate. And so it actually, in hindsight, was great because it was right around the same time that we were talking to these churches and businesses and starting to like transition our business model. So it was like perfect, because if they had actually delivered the door hangers like we paid them to, we might have continued to have like wiggles of hope that like, hey, this old business model would work. And then for the last few years, like all of our marketing really has just been like more or less like some Google ads running in the background. But now we actually have a team that's starting to be built out, like optimizing beyond like Google ads, LinkedIn, email, and stuff like that. Ultimately, my opinion, similar to the brute force that I've told you I've done multiple times, was just that like in the early days, the best way to control your own destiny as a company is outbound sales that you control instead of being dependent on any algorithm. And it's completely free because you can do it like sweat equity style, where it's like I'm sitting here pounding the phone, making cold calls myself. Like that doesn't cost me anything except for my time. You don't need to spend money on Google ads and hope that it works and iterate and like try to, I don't know, make an offering to the algorithm to get it to work.
And I mean, what else would you be spending your time on? You've already decided that you're going to grow a company. Or you should know it's a lot of work. There's no work-life balance. So what else would you be spending your time on versus selling, right? It would be very simplistic to think that anything else is more important. Trip says, do you outsource marketing or are you hiring marketing professionals?
Yeah, at this stage, it sort of depends on the role. So like we have a head of marketing now, and then they work with a couple different agencies. But then for some specific roles, we're like working on hiring people in-house. So it definitely depends. And like I'll caveat that, and also all of the advice that I've given today is just that like totally depends on your company. Some companies are going to be much more marketing driven and inbound sales driven. Totally going to depend on the company, the products, the customers that you're selling. And like ultimately, that's very important to keep in mind. It's just that like your ICP and who your ideal customer profile is going to dictate the sales that you have to do to get in touch with them. For us, we're selling to like these real estate owners that own a piece of land and like don't associate themselves with it anywhere online. It's not like you can go to like 123 Ashburn Street.com and like try to target this person. It's like, it's just, Jane from Austin happens to own this parking lot, and she's also like a professional that works at Oracle during the day, and it's like totally unrelated. So we have to like look up the property records, call them, do direct outreach and stuff like that. It just happens to be the way that it works for our business.
Yeah, we have a lot of marketing related questions. There's another one from Anthony. What are your thoughts on building a marketing funnel as an automated sales team?
Hmm. Like, as in, basically, I assume he's saying basically that you would create sort of like a self-serve, and like that's a whole other thing. Is like uh, all of your sales process and your growth engine is going to be dependent on the size of your customer as well. Like for us, if we were one of the reasons we shifted away from the driveway business is we just realized that like the only way to sign up driveway owners was to go door to door and like knock on the door and educate them. And unfortunately, like we were only making like $5 of revenue per month per spot to our company. And so it's like you cannot have a door-to-door salesperson go to a door and like knock on a door and like earn only $5 per month per spot. It just doesn't add up, right? $5 per month, you need sort of like a marketing funnel and like inbound funnel, and it needs to be self-serve. Only once you get to like the $3,000 to $5,000 of annual revenue per deal can you start to have like a very basic transactional sales team that you hire. And then once you get to like $15,000, $20,000 a year of revenue to your company per deal, then you can start to have like more educated AEs and stuff like that. And then like once you get past like $75,000 or $100,000 of revenue per year per customer, then you can start to have like a really enterprise force. But like all of these are sort of just ranges, but it totally depends on your business. So like you could build a marketing funnel as an automated sales team if it makes sense for your customers. But if you have enterprise level customers, they're probably not going to go through like a sales automated sort of drip thing to sign up on their own. You're going to have to sell to them.
Yep. Yep. There's a couple of more questions that came in, and we have 5 minutes. I'm going to choose. There's one from Raul, which I'll answer. And Jonathan, if you have, additional things, please, share them. Do you think 1 million in ARR is a benchmark for deep tech SaaS startups raising Series A? What metrics, milestones apart from revenue should a deep tech startup focus on? Thanks. Raul, it depends on the product, right? As I said before, it doesn't matter if it's 1 million in ARR or 10 million in ARR or 100K. These are just numbers we come up because they sound big and impressive, but they don't mean anything. The idea here is, who is your target buyer? What is the market? Who are you competing against? What are they currently paying for a solution similar to yours? What type of budgets do these companies have? How long is the sales cycle? Is it recurring revenue? Is it a one-time fee? What is the pricing model? And these are all things you need to take into account. Otherwise, the number doesn't mean anything, right? It's just the number. But Jonathan, if you want to add anything, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that all of these benchmarks totally depend on your business. I don't know anything about deep tech. You should not ask me questions I'm not the person, like I'm not an expert on that. You should absolutely ask some founder that has actually raised in your space what their benchmarks were during Series A. And that's honestly broadly one of the most useful pieces of advice. Is just like the best way to learn is to like hit up people building similar companies to you that are like within, a couple stages of you, Series A, Series B sort of stages, and like talk to those founders because they will know so much. Like the other day, I talked to a company that just raised their Series B, talked to the founder, and like it was like one of the most valuable 30 minutes that I've had in like weeks because I just was absorbing so much information about how to build a team and build a company, which is all the stuff that we're thinking about right now.
What are your thoughts on partner channels to grow your pipeline?
Yeah, obviously, again, this depends on your business, but like I was just talking to a founder the other day, and it seemed like they were really overly focused on these partner channels. And like I say that because I was like, they were like all excited and like talking about like basically bragging about how they closed these 2 big partnership deals for distribution. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. So like, how much are they paying you? And they were like, oh, well, they're not paying us anything. And I was like, oh, so how are you going to make money? And it's like, okay, well, now these partners, if they distribute it to their end users and those end users wind up signing up, then the company will make money.
But it's a big if, and you don't control that. You don't know what they're going to do.
Yeah, you don't know how, like that's the thing. Like when Carol's slides were up, it's be actively selling, right? And like partnerships is not an active sale. And it's also probably one of those sales that's going to take a long time for you to develop a relationship with them, to get the deal signed, to get the deal structured. And like as a startup, you don't have unlimited time. Like you need sales today. So like there are partnerships that we have looked at and like potentially considered, but we ultimately just decided it was not worth our time and investment right now because we need to grow now, not in 2 years. And now that we're like growing and like have a team and like have resources and stuff, now it's worth investing post Series A, maybe even post Series B in like partnership channels that might not pay off for another few years because like we're fully confident that those are going to be valuable and help us get toward our IPO someday. But in the very early days,
revenue. You're not dependent on them for your only revenue. Your sales team is producing and you know that you're scaling and growing. So that's the icing on the cake. It's not the
Exactly.
cake.
Yeah.
We have 1 minute. I'll give you one question. It was asked early on from Henry, and Henry said, what is the hardest part of selling? I think we've covered it, but if you want to add some more color, please go ahead.
I mean, from my point of view, as a first-time founder, for other first-time founders, the hardest part of selling is forcing yourself to do it. And if you create a structure and you create accountability, even having someone like Carol, like a sales coach, to like sit down once a week and say, like, who did you talk to this week? How many, deals are in the pipeline, talking through all that sort of stuff. That accountability is the most important thing, because there's nothing easier than to shy away from doing the sales and just focus on like the product and the marketing and the brand and the
Just
stuff that like
everything else
just,
except for that.
yeah, exactly. And it feels good. And it's like, oh, I did so much today, but like you didn't make any progress if you didn't get any revenue. And so like, that's the thing. It's like forcing yourself to do it. That's the hardest thing about doing sales in the early days as a non-salesperson founder.
You have been converted into a true salesperson, and I love to hear it. Savannah?
All right. Yeah, I think that was amazing. I mean, I don't think, I know. But thank you, Jonathon and Carol, for sharing so much guidance and tips for the community here. Thank you for sharing your time with us. Thank you all for tuning in and giving all your attention to Carol and Jonathon and asking those questions in the chat and making sure that you are present. So we will see you all on Thursday for our next webinar. And we'll hopefully see you in Atlanta for our upcoming event. If not, maybe in New York, San Francisco, or Austin. But thank you all for tuning in, and we'll see you next on Thursday. See ya. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks,
everyone.
Savannah. Thank you, Jonathon. Please connect with us on LinkedIn. If you have questions, we'd love to stay in touch. But thanks, everyone, for coming.
All right. Thanks, everybody.